I think the one mistake that I see people make most frequently is it's another human on the other side, one way or another. And if you're treating another human a way that you wouldn't want to be treated, you're probably not helping your situation. The kinder and more understanding we can be that it's just somebody's job. Yeah, it's going to hurt us financially if it goes bad, but it's just their job. The more that they can make their life easier and let them move on to the next one.
All right, so we're talking about IRS audit notices and what people should do if they get one.
That's right.
What is an IRS notice and why might someone receive one?
An IRS notice is any time that there's a discrepancy between a reporting agency and the information that you filed. So they think that something is different than what you're telling them. You can get one if you reported that you made more in estimated tax payments than what they have on record. You might get one if they have some additional information that wasn't reflected on your tax return.
And what's the first thing you should do after receiving an audit notice, and why is it important not to ignore it?
There's a lot of people that get scared when they see that notice show up. You don't ever really get mail from the IRS. The first thing you should do when you get an audit notice is stay calm. It's just a piece of paper. It's not always going to be 100% correct, but we need to take our time, try and understand what the IRS is telling us, preferably work with a professional to understand on how to respond to that, and realize that it's going to take time.
How common are they?
The IRS is pretty unreliable in terms of the information that they have or information that they lose. So it's not uncommon to see a request from the IRS for something that's already been provided. It doesn't mean that it wasn't sent. It just means that they lost it in one of their warehouses somewhere. An audit that results in significant impact or change in terms of additional tax, that's usually pretty rare. The IRS is kind of the government boogeyman. Am I going to jail for this? And in the end, it's small, nothing. Most of the time, the people who are more risk-taking in some of their financial positions are less worried about it because they kind of knew what the risk was. It's more of, did I get caught kind of attitude.
How much does it take for someone to go to jail over this? How bad does it have to be?
People misunderstand. It takes not just a dollar figure, but it takes repeated ignoring of the government's attempt to contact you and to get you back into compliance before they're willing to put you in jail over it. Generally, I would expect that has to be somewhere over $100,000 in tax debt, and you had to have ignored multiple letters before they're willing to go that far.
Have you ever had a memorable or unusual audit case?
I wouldn't say that I've had a memorable audit case so much as sometimes it's more memorable about who's involved. And sometimes, again, the IRS auditor that you're corresponding with is missing some gross understanding. And you're like, okay, I've got to go in and do a whole lot of education for the IRS who started this whole process. So somehow something got flagged and they just got handed a file and it's on their desk and they don't really know what they're doing. And you have to go, okay. The only other option is, can I talk to your supervisor? You don't generally want to do, I prefer to avoid that if I can, because that just tends to make people angry. Like, no one wants to hear that.
What are some common misconceptions about the IRS audit process that you think people should know about?
And there's kind of two sides to that coin. There's the people who get an IRS letter and say, I don't know what this is, and they don't do anything with it. Well, that's not the right response. You need to take action in some respect. The other one is where somebody gets a letter and they think they have to have an answer today. The IRS is so understaffed and backlogged that any response that we send to them, I guarantee you, will take 6 to 8 weeks to process, and you'll probably get another letter saying, hey, we need more time anyways. So it's not something that you can just pick up the phone and wrap up.
Can you explain how the actual audit process works and what the IRS is looking for during an audit?
These days, typically what we're seeing more of is what's called a statistical or a correspondence audit. This is where they've already identified something that they're not necessarily going to tell you about in their letter, but something that doesn't make sense to them. And they're going to ask for more information or backup or proof to understand what you're doing. Maybe you had something that was really off the charts in terms of expenses for 1 year versus what the rest of your industry is doing. a traditional audit would be, hey, let's sit down and go through absolutely everything. Every line, prove it all. I haven't seen one of those in 15 years.
Is that just because they're so, backlogged?
Both, I think. They are trying to use technology to their advantage to identify the bigger opportunities to collect tax that was missed. And they are ridiculously understaffed.
All right. What tips can you offer for organizing records and documents in preparation for an audit?
Make sure you have a system to it, right? A shoebox is not a system. A garbage bag full of receipts is not a system. I can print it from my email is not a good system. Have it ready to go. It's whether that's in paper format or whether it's organized all digital images, that's okay too. But just make sure that you have an organization structure to it, preferably that's documented, so that you can share that with somebody else. So maybe you don't have to tie up your time sitting there with an auditor.
Do you think most business owners have that level of organization?
Life is always a process of improvement. We start somewhere, and I try and help people understand that maybe the goal is here. What can we do to work and get closer? Sometimes goals are meant to be for the long haul, not something that we can flip a switch and fix overnight. But okay, here's where we are today. What can we do better tomorrow? Do I think that most people have the documentation necessary in my perfect world? No, but I don't even in my own personal life. So it's again, what can we be doing better for tomorrow?
How can an accountant help during an audit? And what should someone look for when choosing a professional?
So generally, I recommend that during an audit, the taxpayer really probably shouldn't have any contact with the IRS, at least as much as possible. We're able, as a tax professional, to get what's called a power of attorney for tax matters only. That says that I can speak to the IRS on your behalf. That means that I can make sure and give them the answers that are in the language that they know how to speak. And I'm not necessarily oversharing other information that might make them probe further into something else that they weren't already, right? The last thing that you want is to say something and have them go, oh, well, maybe I should dig through that pile of paperwork now.
Have you ever seen that happen? Where somebody maybe reveals a little bit too much and gets screwed because
Yes, very much so. There was a client that we had that was asked a question, and he was answering the IRS directly, and he said absolutely all the wrong things. And the auditor was pretty much like, okay, well, I guess my audit's done now. So again, it really comes down to don't overshare with the IRS. Answer the questions that they're asking and nothing more. I think the one mistake that I see people make most frequently is, again, it's another human on the other side, one way or another. And if you're doing things that if you're treating another human a way that you wouldn't want to be treated, you're probably not helping your situation. The kinder and more understanding we can be that it's just somebody's job. Yeah, it's going to hurt us financially if it goes bad, but it's just their job. The more that they can make their life easier and let them move on to the next one.
How important is it to have an accountant in the case of an audit?
A lot of that comes down to risk tolerance. I prefer to have a professional on my side when there's things that I don't do on a regular basis and they need doing. If you're someone who's a little bit more do-it-yourself, you're already understanding and taking on a certain amount of risk. I think the same holds true with interacting with the IRS. If you're willing to take the risk, you can go it alone. It might be more worthwhile to know that things aren't going to increase in scope by working with a professional.
What's the strangest or funniest things you encountered during an audit?
Most of that tends to come out before the audit happens. Sometimes even the bookkeeping and working with somebody on their monthly financial statements can share a little bit more information that you're looking for. We all joke about it, but when we start seeing transactions going through OnlyFans, you're like, okay, enough. I'm done. I don't need to know more here.
What's one thing you wish everyone knew about dealing with the IRS or audit process?
Two things. They're people. It's just people on the other end, and we need to, the easier that we can make their life, the easier our life will be as well. And it takes a lot longer than you think. Every time. Everybody wants resolution, and you'll get it eventually.